I think we can start now. It's been a couple of minutes. So hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on how to make your employees feel heard and valued in the workplace, brought to you by TINYpulse by Limeade. I am very pleased to introduce your speakers today, Dr. Elora Voyles and Tariq. Dr. Elora Voyles is our people scientist at the Limeade Institute, and Taylor is our senior customer success enablement specialist at Limeade. Elora and Taylor have a lot of impactful information to share with you today, and I am quite excited to hear about it, as you should be too. A recording of this webinar will be sent to you after the session, so don't worry about taking notes. You'll be able to watch it on demand and share with other members of your organization as well. At TINYpulse, we're always looking to hear what people have to say. So although we will leave time at the end of the webinar for a Q&A, if you have any questions in the moment, feel free to ask them in the chat. We'll be keeping an eye on that as well. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to Elora and Taylor.
Thank you. Thanks for the introduction, Allie. And I want to thank you all for joining us today. It's great to see so many people coming from so many different places and joining us this morning. Get us set up in our presentation. Oh, I've got something weird going on. Hold on. Okay, that should work. There. So the title of our presentation is How to Make Employees Feel Heard and Valued in the Workplace. This is a huge topic, especially given the Great Resignation that is currently going on. Whether your employees feel valued, heard, and recognized can be the difference between them choosing to stay or choosing to find employment somewhere else. So as you know, we had a quick introduction. I'm Dr. Elora Voyles, and Taylor Tariq is joining us today. She's a senior customer success enablement specialist, and she has a ton of great experience working with customers and doing some awesome training with employees. And I'm a people scientist with TINYpulse, so I do a lot of research, and I also consult with customers as well. I'll hand it over to Taylor to tell you about what we're going to cover today.
All right. Thanks so much, Elora. I know my title is a little bit of a mouthful, so but I'm really excited to kick us off with the agenda and just give us a little bit of insight on what we have in store today. As the webinar title would suggest, we're going to talk about employees feeling heard, valued, and recognized in the workplace, and how this really impacts their experience at work. So ultimately, all these things roll up into how do I feel as a part of this organization? We'll also touch on what you could gain from doing these things and what you might stand to lose if these things go ignored or unacknowledged. And then I wish I could have just inserted recommendations and data into each part of these things, because it's really going to be woven through the entire presentation. But we will make sure that we have examples and customer applications to share so that you really get that research perspective as well as the application perspective. Not listed on this slide is the dialogue that we hope to create throughout, where we hear from you and your experiences. Elora and I are very collaborative and interactive and really want to hear from the group, especially such a large, diverse spread population. I'm sure we have some really great perspectives, so I'm really excited for that. Before we really dive in, we wanted to get an idea of our audience today. So we're actually going to start with a quick poll. And we wanted to know how you feel your organization is performing in terms of employees feeling heard, valued, and recognized. So the poll should have popped up, and we'll give you a little bit of time to answer.
Yeah, and just to give you a highlight of the different answers you can give, you can say anywhere ranging from weak, there's some significant changes we need to make, to needing development, we're getting some things right, but we need to improve. Average, we're doing okay with creating that environment, but we have more to learn. And then strong, we have this culture where employees feel heard, and we're looking to share our insights. I see we have a lot of answers ticking in. It's great to see how interactive you're being with the poll right now. It looks like most are within average or needing a little bit of development.
Few people strong category. So hopefully we can hear from some of you today as well.
Yeah, we'll give you another 10, 15 seconds to get your answers in, and then we'll dive into the presentation. Okay, so just to highlight, it looks like the majority, 47% said average, you know, we're creating this environment, but there are things that we could work on. The next largest category was those who need development. You're getting some things right, but you really could stand to improve some aspects of how your employees feel heard or how they feel valued or recognized. And then the next group is 11% for weak. There are some significant changes in the organization. I'm definitely curious to hear about those experiences as well. We want to hear the full spread from, you know, those who have organizations that are struggling with these issues all the way up to organizations where you feel that you're nailing it. And that's 5% who say they have a strong culture where employees feel heard and valued. Thank you so much for sharing your comments here. I would love if you want to drop into the chat and kind of give us a little bit more color. We'll come back to your comments as well. So the first thing we're going to tackle is feeling heard. This is this aspect of employees feeling that their organization, their employer, their manager, their HR department, that they listen to them and they care about what input they have, and that ultimately what they say can influence real decisions in the organization. So that's a summary of being heard. I also looked at a research study that interviewed a bunch of, it was 70 banking employees to understand what they described as feeling heard in their organization. And the employees' responses to these interviews kind of summed up being heard as feeling that their concerns were heard and listened to, feeling that there was like a meaningful exchange where they were able to state their concerns, someone listened and responded to them, and then finally that the conversation resulted in necessary follow-up actions. So it's not just like, okay, we had a good conversation, that's it. There's that extra step of change or something happening. In contrast, those banking employees who said that they felt unheard, they described shutdown behaviors, things like kind of ending the conversation prematurely, changing the subject, or for example, telling employees they needed to talk about or focus on something else. And then lack of follow-up or an insufficient follow-up. So even hearing employees out and doing the first listening part is not enough. There still needs to be that follow-up. Otherwise, employees will feel unheard. Yeah, join in, Tariq.
I think that the interesting thing here is exactly what you're saying. Like, it's not just the listening piece. That's a great first step, is to ask those questions and get that employee feedback. But in order to sort of build that habit and build that trust between the employer and the employees, you have to implement that 360 feedback loop. And that's something that I talk with my customers about all the time when I'm working with them. And they say, you know, we do all these surveys and, you know, our employees feel, you know, survey fatigue, but they say they want to be listened to, but we do all these things. And then I say, but like, what are you doing after the survey to get them to reinforce the behavior of actually sharing their opinion? So a lot of times it's that you ask the questions, which is a great first step. You actually review the results, you create those action plans, and then all of that is shared back and the actions being taken, so that I, as an employee, can say, oh, I said that, they took this action, and now this change is being implemented. And I think you'll find that that also helps reinforce the behavior while also helping employees feel heard.
Absolutely. And one way to know that employees don't feel heard is if they shut down and they stop giving that feedback, because they feel, you know, what is the difference? I was just checking the chat, and Sherry made a great point about the fact that remote staff can make it especially important to ensure that employees are feeling heard, because you don't get that same kind of communication that you get in person. You need the camera for body language, and you need those opportunities for conversations. And I saw one other comment I wanted to highlight. Lina Miri, I think I'm saying it right, I hope, commented on how they work in a large production facility, and those production workers were feeling like there wasn't a lot of desire to hear what they had to say, and that Pulse questions helped highlight the fact that they were feeling unheard so that that could be addressed. So we'll come back into the comments, but we have a quick discussion for you as well. So feel free to join in here through the chat. What does your organization do to help employees feel heard? Oh, and I see one other comment from Maggie, who commented that they started using TINYpulse at the beginning of this year, and that it's been a huge difference in terms of people feeling heard through those surveys and through being able to kind of give their feedback to the organization. Yeah, and it's even great when you see those responses and you're able to respond and make real changes. Let's see. Yeah, and encouraging people to come talk to. I think employees need to sometimes be reminded that you're here to listen, and that you have a suggestion box, or that you're conducting surveys in order to get their true opinion.
I love the diversity of options that I'm seeing in the chat too. Is one, just, feasibility, if I'm not in front of a computer all day, like what are my options to be able to still give feedback and have that equal opportunity? But then also just from a, work inclusion perspective, maybe I'm not someone who wants to be up in front of people and sharing my opinions and, sharing it in front of people, but making sure that you're hearing voices throughout the whole organization. And just because my working style might be more, I'm a little bit shyer, I don't have a lot of, customer interaction or something like that, that my voice is still heard and not shoved down because I'm not the loudest in the room, so to speak. So I love seeing the different avenues of which some of that feedback is being collected.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point, because employees may feel comfortable, for example, discussing something in a one-on-one with their manager if it's not too delicate, if they have that trust. But there might be some things where employees would prefer to voice their opinion or their concern through a suggestion box that's anonymous, or an anonymous survey. Oh, and one other thing I wanted to highlight that I saw, Bill made an excellent point about how employees are not going to feel heard unless the attempts from the organization and managers are genuine. So it needs to be authentic, truly communicating, we want to know your opinion. So I'll hand this over to Taylor for practical recommendations on, how to make sure that your employees will feel heard.
Awesome, thank you. So we're trying to split up these recommendation slides into sort of these like overall themes, and then actually giving an application. So hopefully you'll get kind of a little taste of, here's what we think, and then here's how we've done it. And I think the feeling heard from an organizational perspective is really trying to give your employees a voice in business direction or decisions. And sometimes that first step is just sharing. We hear a lot with the customers that we work with about how certain employees don't feel as connected to leadership or the vision of the organization. And it's because they haven't really been pulled into that conversation. So sometimes it's just sharing that vision so that people can go, oh, that's how my job really connects to what the organization is trying to achieve. But some of the other ways that you can do this are through just surveying on strategy and figuring out, are people understanding the direction of our organization and feeling like I have an opinion about this and I'd like to share, but I'm not sure where to go, making sure that it's easy for them to access. Gathering feedback on training events that you do, kind of creating this space for people to use their voice in every employee experience that they have, all the way down to just regular general feedback, like having a space, I had this interaction at work and I think I have a better way to do this, and making sure there's a space for that. And I wanted to provide a customer story example. I was working with a large enterprise nationwide organization that they were looking at some of their assessment results, engagement survey, as well as some of the things that Limeade and TINYpulse does. And they noted that there was this recurring theme that employees were really unclear about the direction of the company. They didn't have great feedback or visual into the leadership, and I trust them in the direction that they're going. And you can click to the next one, Elora. So during their annual company goal planning, they decided to present the objectives and key results of their OKRs early. So it was before anything was really finalized. It was more, this is what we're thinking. This is where we want to go as an organization and what we're trying to accomplish this year. And they actually let employees review and leave comments, ask questions about, well, why are we focused on this? What was the driver of this? And it created one just amazing open dialogue, but also just helped get the sort of boots on the ground perspective of this OKR feels a little bit out of reach. Can we talk about this? Can we understand why this goal was set? And then after they collected all that feedback, they represented the OKRs. And we actually saw a really amazing outcome that they were starting to see shifts in their employee perception and data of leaders first reviewing the feedback. So that's one thing, is putting it in front of leaders, making sure that they're aware, and it's not necessarily going from individual contributor trickling all the way up through 10 different people to the CEO, but it's straight from individual contributors directly to leaders. Employees were reporting feeling more clear direction of how their role and the things that they should focus on that year to help achieve those company goals. And then employees were also saying that they understood more about how what they're doing every day pushes into the organizational success for that year or 2 years. So I know this might feel kind of like a larger thing, and not every organization can do this, but I think it can be even on just like a smaller scale, and just creating those opportunities to be a little bit more open and transparent, and giving your employees that opportunity to actually share their feedback and opinion.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think part of this process, it does take a little bit more work on the front end. You know, the company has to have their OKRs prepared a little bit ahead of time. But I think in the end, it's so worth it to have that opportunity for employees to go through and respond. And I think another piece of this is just building that trust and that reputation for listening to employees. I saw in the chat that someone named Robert mentioned this 10-10 meeting, where 10 minutes is dedicated to the employee speaking and 10 minutes is dedicated to the manager speaking, so that they can both kind of have that give and take and have their time. And I think just having kind of like a trademark thing like that almost helps boost that reputation of like, hey, I'm here to listen to you. You have these 10 minutes where you can tell me anything you need to talk to me about. So we looked into some data. We recently collected this from a huge sample of employees. Over 500 employees responded to this. And on average, we found that employees do want to give some feedback to their employers through a survey on a monthly basis. So 30.5% of them said yes, monthly. There was a very small, like only 4.2% of employees who said they never want to give survey feedback. So that would be the tiny percentage who might just not respond if you give a survey. But if you think about it, 95% are going to want to give you some sort of feedback through the survey. And many of them are going to want to do it either monthly, quarterly, or twice a month. So having these opportunities available where you either create a survey or you purchase a kind of survey offering and give it to your employees is valuable, because not only does it help employees feel heard, it helps you listen and decide based on what you're hearing from your employees.
I love the sort of what I pull from just looking at the data here is like, you have to find that balance between asking effective and thoughtful questions at an appropriate cadence where people have the opportunity to respond and think about it without feeling like, oh my gosh, I'm just getting pelted with these questions all the time. And also allotting your team then to decide on action plans to make change. So also making sure you're setting yourself up for success, and like, oh my gosh, we asked 10 questions over the course of 10 weeks and now we don't know which one is most important and where do we start. So I love the idea of kind of just playing around with that cadence and seeing where you get that most participation so that it's effective for you and for your employees.
I'm glad you brought this up, Taylor, actually, because we had a question in the Q&A from Boria that said, too much feedback or surveys can be dangerous. How can we balance it? And I think that's part of it, is like thinking about and really kind of testing out a good cadence. And the other part, and you were starting to touch on this too, is the idea of being strategic about the questions that you ask. Don't waste employees' time with silly questions. Or for example, I've encountered this with an organization before where they were wrestling with asking a particular survey question. And I think it was related to salary, if I recall. And I stopped them for a moment. I said, well, okay, let's say that employees say they want you to improve some aspect of the salary. Do you have the power to do that? Mm-hmm. And they said, well, no. And I said, well, don't ask the question. Mm-hmm. And I think this is important. Don't ask a question if there's not anything you can do about it. So, if you're not able to make that change at that time, it's going to be frustrating for employees to kind of air their grievances and have no response. Instead, it's something that you would want to address in a town hall meeting and actually explain why there can't be a change. That's where good communication can help with that listening. So you communicate that, and then you also hear their feedback so that they understand.
Perception is everything, for sure.
It is. And here's another point about listening data. And I think that, if employee listening and having employees feel heard was easy, every organization would be nailing it. But the truth is, it isn't as easy as we think it should be or could be. And the reason is that sometimes through this listening data, through surveys, we might get results we don't want to see. I know personally, like I've consulted with organizations where I shared results that they weren't happy to receive because it means that they're not doing great. I've discovered, for example, like evidence of like gender bias in an organization. I had to deliver that information to them. But it's really important to make sure that you're listening, even when it's hard, well, especially when it's hard. So we conducted this survey. This was again with that sample of over 500 employees. And we asked about their desire for more feedback from managers. And at first I was a little shocked. I said, oh, we have a good almost, 28% who say they don't want any more feedback from their manager. And I thought, well, that's odd. I feel like most people do want more feedback. And so I'd love to ask the audience, what do you think is driving these results? Why is there a good 28% of employees who just don't want more feedback from their manager? And we'll chime in a moment because Taylor and I had a long conversation about this in terms of kind of what might be driving this. Oh yeah, and Bill has a good point there that employees need to feel valued, and that's part of it. Mike chimed in, the truth hurts. It does sometimes, yeah, and that's the hard thing as a manager to get feedback. Oh, Wendy said the feedback isn't constructive or it might not always be valuable. Sometimes it's negative or not actionable. That's what Rob said.
Training.
Caitlin.
The T word, having training.
Yeah, training. Yes. Yeah, you're all touching it on it. And that's exactly what Taylor and I were talking about is they may not want more feedback because it's not been delivered well, or they don't have that trust with their manager, or their manager isn't giving them something actionable. It hasn't been productive. I think people do want feedback, but it needs to be well delivered. And Taylor, like, ding, ding, ding. Yes, training.
I think when we, in terms of, okay, you've taken the step, you've listened, you've got the data set and you're looking at these numbers. I sort of have two things that this slide kind of brings to mind to me is one, I try to personally get away from, putting them into buckets of like good data and bad data. Really, it's just data. You're just gathering information about your employees' experience or your organization. And both of them are going to drive some sort of action. One just maybe says, you know, we have to drive more of a positive action. And then the other one is, let's just keep doing what we're doing because they're receiving it really well. So I would just take, you know, any data subset that you get that maybe is less than ideal as this is our opportunity for growth and change, and think how impactful that's going to be if you're getting that, you know, quote unquote bad data from your employees and you take action to fix it. Like I just think that could be so amazing as from an employee experience perspective. And then I think in terms of interpreting the data, thinking about the underlying cause, like we could have easily looked at this slide and said, oh, managers just shouldn't give feedback anymore and just been done. But really it's about, okay, what could be causing this? And that's the conversation that Elora and I had is it how the managers are giving feedback? Are they only focusing on the negative? Are they not providing coaching or plans to help employees, you know, get better and have that feedback be better next time? And so if I were looking at this data and I had to sort of present it, I would say, you know, my action steps would be, let's dive into the manager training that we're giving and make sure that they're equipped to actually have these conversations so that it's a good experience for their teams as well as for them as a manager.
Yes, Taylor, you've nailed it. I think one of the shocking things too, I'll add before we move on, is that, you know, managers, a lot of them have never been trained on how to give feedback or how to do performance evaluations. So check in with your managers on that and see if they, you know, what their method is and whether they're comfortable. Many managers forget a key part of delivering feedback is also listening. If there's not trust and there's not listening, employees are not going to accept that feedback. And so just to hit a quick quote that we have, you know, to really get that diversity and to get the information about your organization, you need to find the people who are going to give you different opinions and different views and really invite them to the conversation. So even when it might be difficult or it might be feedback that you don't want to hear, it can be so valuable. And this is Adam Grant, who is also an IO psychologist. Now on to feeling valued. So feeling valued refers to, and we're going to break it down because this is a fluffy one. Feeling valued is when employees feel that their organization cares about them and really respects their opinion and sees what they contribute. So we kind of wrestled with this because it's more abstract. Feeling heard and feeling recognized are a little bit easier to kind of put your hands on, but feeling valued really just means that an employee's value inherently in their contribution is frequently acknowledged in the organization. And it's difficult to define because it really varies based on employees and organizations and even situational. I told Taylor, I said, you know, it's kind of like love languages. Employees have different ways that they want to be shown that they're valued. So some employees may want more responsibility, may want to get new projects. Other employees just want to be able to get their PTO and like do their time, do their work, and then go home. So it's not a one size fits all.
I love that perspective because I think it's also part of feeling valued is the organization or the manager probably is the best, you know, person for this to understand what value looks like to that person. If it's growth opportunities, if it's opportunities outside of their general, you know, work structure, because they just like to contribute and collaborate and really understanding that. I think that's a huge driver of not only is my opinion and my work valued, but my organization understands what value means to me. And so I love to pose the question to the group just to sort of, you know, we acknowledge that this is a little abstract and, you know, I love the term fluffy because it's based off of emotion, but it's the things that people do that create this feeling of being valued. So I'd love to ask the group, what are some ways that your organization or your manager has made you feel valued?
Yeah, feel free to drop it in the chat. Oh, and Charlene asked a quick question that I think is really good. What do you do to gather the information about the kind of like love languages of value for employees? I think Taylor had a great point with managers are really on the kind of front line of asking and better understanding what employees need. You can also conduct surveys as well, just to understand kind of as a whole what the population needs. But in terms of like really giving that personalized care and that personalized kind of expression of value, a lot of it's on the managers.
I think it's also making it a part of just that manager experience or mentorship, you know, even if you're not necessarily a manager of people per se, but maybe you're seen as an unspoken, you know, leader, or you're a mentor to new hires or something, just making it a part of that process to say, how do you work best with your manager? How can I help promote your growth? How can I show you that, you know, if after this year, what does success look like to you? And really asking those transparent and honest questions. I definitely think you're right, Elora. It starts at the manager level, because that's that direct line to, you know, my performance essentially at work. But I think everyone can kind of do a little bit to help promote those conversations of how can we work best together.
Yeah, and I'm seeing in the chat a few different themes. One of them is this idea of not being micromanaged and having your manager trust you and just say, hey, I trust you to do this job. Reach out to me if you need something. Mm-hmm. Another theme I've seen is just reminding employees explicitly, like, hey, I value you, I care about you, I'm here to support you. I saw another person like kind of giving that public recognition and saying, hey, job well done. Caitlin here said asking employees about their opinions and ideas is a way to show their value. Yeah, so I see a lot of really good suggestions on, you know, and if you notice, all of these are really easy and free things to do to show employees that they're valued. You know, just kind of, yeah, affirmations, telling them, hey, I care about you. You matter in this organization, offering support, giving public shout outs and saying, hey, like, Lexi, that was a great suggestion. I'm so glad you're in this meeting to, you know, share your ideas. Mm-hmm. So that is awesome. Oh, and Lexi's in the audience. That's why I picked Lexi. Okay, so now we have the case for care, organizational care to show value. And Taylor's going to walk you through this.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that I think goes hand in hand with feeling valued is feeling like, okay, my organization cares about me. And it might feel like, you know, that's less of a business transaction or something that you don't necessarily hear in the workplace. But I just personally feel like we spend so much time at work. I know that I feel on my best days and the days that I feel really committed to my organization, the organization or whoever I've interacted with that day has done something to make me feel like I'm a valid part of this organization and they genuinely care that I'm here. So we've done some research around this and have uncovered some pretty amazing sort of business outputs by organizations just taking the time to show that care and demonstrate that value. And we found that they're 2 times more likely to be engaged at work when an employee feels like my organization cares for me. This is probably my favorite one, 4 times less likely to suffer from stress and burnout. And I love sort of the insert of the word suffer, because it doesn't necessarily mean that they aren't going to feel these things. But when they do feel them, they know that they have a manager or an organization that is going to support them in relieving and not sitting in silence and suffering from these things until the point that they actually burn out and leave the organization, or performance drops, or any of those things that I'm sure we've all encountered at some point. 7 times more likely to feel included at work. I know that when I'm in the presence of people that I know really care about me, I can 100% be myself. I can offer my opinions. I can use my voice. I can say things the way that I would say them, even if it's in small objection to somebody else. There's that level of comfort there. And it's definitely something that you want to make sure. I saw a couple comments about inclusion and incorporating others' opinions into, you know, those moments when you felt valued at work. So I think this one is super important. 9 times more likely to stay at their company for 3 or more years. In my experience in the companies I've worked for, I don't know that I really feel like I could just, hit the ground running. I don't really need that many people's help. I can do my job day in and day out until you really hit that like 1.5, 2-year mark. And then all of a sudden you're just solo and you're rocking it and crushing it. And you don't necessarily need the onboarding support and all of that anymore. So I think that 3-year mark is super important, because if you think about all the time that you spend onboarding, training, giving organizational knowledge, training about, product or whatever your company sells or stands for. And then that person decides, this organization doesn't really value me. I think I'm going to leave. And all of a sudden you've got, 18 months of time that you've spent on this individual and haven't even gotten really to see them at their full potential yet. So I think the differentiator here is not just that they're leaving, but they're leaving before that 3-year mark where everyone kind of hits their stride, makes that impact. And there's research to share that sort of 3rd and 4th year are the years that employees really, really kind of dig their heels in and can really be a valuable contributor to the organization. And lastly, 10 times more likely to recommend their company. Elora talked in the beginning about, this great resignation, and how awesome would it be to be a company that in this time when so many employees are turning and walking out the door, that you're actually working for an organization where someone says, no, I'm going to stay and I want people to come here because of A, B, C, X, Y, Z reasons. So I think these are pretty powerful metrics. And I saw some questions in the beginning about, what if my managers or my leaders don't want to hear the bad feedback or the bad data? And I think this is a pretty impactful slide to support that conversation and say, you're welcome to your opinion, but here are some of the things that we might be risking, or we are, standing not to gain if we don't have these things in place. And you can go ahead to the next slide, Elora, because I'm sure one of the questions or things that people might be thinking is, okay, care and value feels, again, really, really ambiguous. Like, how do I really go about sharing some of those things? And so we've created sort of this framework of, here are some of the ways that care and value can show up in an organization. And, today we're talking about feeling heard and feeling recognized, and all of those things show up in this structure of, and you can click through to the whole thing, Elora. I think there's 3 levels. Yeah. So you can see that all of these themes and things that we're talking about show up here. So if you're wondering, well, how do I just like show care? How do I just do that? There's 12, 8, 10 things here that you could decide to just focus on. Okay, so tomorrow I'm going to focus on recognizing people, and we're going to try and find ways every week or every month, quarter, to do that. So I think you can also look at this and say, these are the things we do really, really well, and here are some of the areas that we might be we could stand some more support or effort to make these things show up better in the organization. Elora, I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on this as well. I know we talked a lot about how the value piece is like, how do we harness that? So I'd love to hear a little bit of your feedback as well.
Yeah, just kind of looking at all of this as a whole, I would say that it's truly a relationship between the organization and the employee. And this is something that's built over time. And by doing these things, you are supporting and building that relationship all the way from when you first encounter the employee and hire them to when they might exit. So listening and connecting, giving them that dignity and respect kind of builds up that bank of positive and goodwill in that relationship with the employee. And it's so important just to add as much as you can because employees who feel cared about and supported are not going to turn over as easily when something unexpected happens. But if there's been a long history of feeling disrespected or unheard, when one little thing kind of happens that's unexpected, like let's say they don't get the promotion that they were hoping to get, that's when employees are going to turn over because there isn't a lot of reason to stay. But if they've been supported along the way, that's something that holds them in with the organization and makes them feel encouraged to stay and kind of continue to receive that care and that kind of positive relationship.
So again, circling back to our recommendations and application. And I think one of the important call outs that I want to make is that value doesn't have to show up in a monetary form. So similarly to how we were talking about feeling heard and how that shows up, and now we're talking about feeling valued, and it's a love language. And what does that look like? Is we don't always have to think of value as being this monetary thing. It can be the actions that we take to actually show employees that we are advocating for them. So as a manager, as an organization, are you advocating when you feel someone deserves a growth opportunity or a promotion? Putting someone's name in the hat for a big project to say, you know, I think they have a lot of potential to have really great thoughts and opinions on this topic, and I'd love for them to have this opportunity. And I think on the flip side too, it's not always about the biggest and brightest, they're ready for a promotion, but it's also facilitating growth from the people who might be struggling and being available for coaching and development and saying, you know, maybe this go round, it's not your turn to be promoted into this next level position, or we know you were interviewing with some of your peers for this manager role, and here's why we don't think you're ready. But then making sure that they know that you're investing in them to eventually get there and get ready. And so I actually wanted to share sort of a personal story. I love how vulnerable and open everyone is being in the chat. So I figured I would do the same. So this is our safe space that we've created. And one of the things that one of my best managers ever did was really take the time to understand my strengths and my areas for growth. And that was by just kind of regular conversations, asking me questions as I would talk to him about the things that I'm doing with my customers or the struggles that I was having, and kind of having that listening skill and watching me articulate things and say, you know, I see you're really, really great in this area, but if you really want to go to the next level and keep growing your career, here's the areas where I could see you needing some extra coaching or opportunity to grow in that area. And so based on that, we were able to create an action plan, and I was provided training opportunities and resources. And it was nothing, you know, out of, you know, huge scope. It was, hey, go get mentored by this person for a month and sit in on sales meetings so you can understand when they're negotiating, how they do that, and the things that they think about. It was resources already in play that I could take advantage of. And by the end of it, I felt more confident and efficient in my role. And my manager was in a position where he could say, now I can advocate for you on behalf of you for this promotion. So the outcome, again, I'm feeling valued that I was struggling in this area, and my organization didn't say, well, you're just not very good at your job then. My organization said, we know that you can get there, and here's how we want to get you there. And then I felt even more valued about my contributions were being acknowledged, and I was reaching the things in my career that I wanted to get to. So I don't think it always has to be, you're getting a raise, you're getting promoted, you're getting all these things, and you're always, you know, in the spotlight. Sometimes it's just the time that you take and invest in your employees that I personally think that goes much further than those sort of like the top level things that we generally promote and recognize.
Yeah, and Taylor, I want to thank you for sharing that story, because it's nice to hear directly from your perspective, you know, what happened from the beginning, what you wanted and what your manager did, and then how it made you feel and what actually came out of that. Before we get into a recognition, there's actually a really good question that ties into this that I saw in the chat. Kristen Nestor asked an excellent question, and I thought we could kind of brainstorm a little bit on it. Any tips for recognizing employees while not demotivating employees who have not been explicitly recognized? So, you know, imagine you have a team, you're recognizing like the contribution of 2 people on the team, but maybe there's 3 or 4 other people who haven't been on that project or whatever it might be. How would you handle that?
I think the first piece is being really self-aware that you have people that are regularly getting recognized, and then you have a bucket of people or a handful of people who aren't getting recognized as much. So I think that's the first piece. Is one, I love the question because it means that you're aware of your entire employee base, not just the people that seem to be out in front, you know, the high achievers, or, you know, however we want to sort of categorize them. But you're also paying attention to this other group. And so I think part of it is, again, like that investment piece and understanding, well, why is it we're not recognizing that person? Is it because maybe their working style is very just low key? Maybe they just kind of stay under the radar. They do a really good job. They do their job up to the standards that are expected, but they don't necessarily get so many opportunities to share their work, and that sort of thing. So I think it's also, it's looking at the differences between those two groups. I also think there's a tendency to, at least in my experience, sometimes there's a tendency to highlight when, you know, maybe we like saved this big account, or maybe we landed this huge customer. And yes, those are things to be celebrated, but I also would like broaden the scope of what you think deserves recognition. So if I'm managing a book of business, for example, as a strategic account executive, and none of my customers ever threaten to leave, or aren't, you know, say they're not going to renew or take us out for RFP, like that is something that is stability. That's stable performance. And so I think sometimes it's also rethinking how you categorize what gets recognized, and kind of broadening that scope of, it's not always the biggest, the brightest, the loudest actions that should get recognized, but sometimes it's the stability of, you just continue to do a really good job, and here's why that's important to our organization.
I love that answer. The one thing that I would add in addition is also having different modes of recognizing employees. So it doesn't always need to be a super formal method of recognizing at the beginning of every meeting, you know, the employees. You might also have like the quick one-on-one just chat and just say, hey, I recognize the hard work you're doing. So that way employees don't feel like, oh, I didn't get recognized, and that's one and only opportunity this month to get recognized. There's so many other different ways and methods that it can come through.
I love it.
Okay. So getting into being recognized, I dug into some research and found that recognition stems from two different sources. There's the first really obvious one that we all think of, and that's getting the congratulations or acknowledgement, or the prize, the kind of well done after a big project or work task. There's also another form of recognition that doesn't always immediately come to mind, but it's the recognition and trust in an employee's skill when they're working or making decisions. And this recognition can be extended by, for example, entrusting an employee with an important project. That's how you can recognize them and say, hey, I know you have the skills to do this, and I trust your judgment. Here's this awesome project that I'd like for you to work on. That's a way that we don't often think of in recognition, but it is one of the other methods. And so now we have a quick discussion. We'd love to see what you have to say in the chat, but how do you recognize your peers, and when and where does that recognition happen? So for example, there can be like, my manager might just tell me, oh, hey, good job. Or they might send through like TINYpulse cheers, a recognition to me that everyone will see, along with like a GIF. Yeah, how do you recognize your peers, and how do you recognize your employees? Oh, recognizing the whole publicly, always before doing individual as well. I like that. Kind of just recognizing the whole team and saying, hey, everyone's doing great. I see that in a couple of places. Cheers on TINYpulse. I have to say, I love getting the cheers, like, and along with like gifts and like the explanation of what you did. Someone said on their Slack channel. Oh yeah, and Jackie, we'll be sharing a recording of this. Bonuses, yes. Yeah, excellent. Any other ways? Oh, and an app too, to share that recognition. Team lunches, I love that. Gift cards, culture awards. Yes, these are all excellent ways. Oh, all hands meetings, those are a great way. I think public recognition just kind of ups it for us, like, wow, not only does my team know that I did great, but everyone knows.
I love the simplicity in all of these too. Like not everything has to be like an awards banquet. Like sometimes it's just, we start every meeting 2 minutes, you have the floor to recognize someone. And I think it not only it's simple, it's easy, quick to implement, but I think it also ingrains it more into the organizational culture that this is just something we do. It's not just something that we feel we have to do or this one time of year. And if you didn't get it that time of year, then you missed the boat. Then it's, you know, it's constant and we're always building each other up. So I love that.
Absolutely. Just having all these different ways of recognizing employees is really powerful. And another thing you can do if you're not sure of how to recognize employees is actually survey them or ask them like, hey, what makes you feel good when you've done a good job? Like, what do you want to receive or be told? That could be really helpful. You can also kind of watch, like, I've definitely recognized one of my employees and like kind of praise them in front of the team. And like, I look over at their little square and I see them beaming and I'm just like, yes, like it's a win for me to make them feel so good for something that they did.
Yeah, love that.
And in terms of the benefits of employee recognition, I'll go through this quickly, but this is our sample of 500 employees again. But we found that 88.2% indicated that employee recognition can be beneficial for increasing that social and cultural connection at work too. So it goes beyond just having employees feel good about a job well done. It can make them feel more connected, more collaborative, and more engaged in their work, just to know that their efforts have been recognized and that they are, getting the kudos for a job well done. Mm-hmm. On the flip side, the negative side, there are many employees who feel a lack of recognition. We found that 65.4% report at least some degree of like feeling a lack of recognition. So there are some who, 23.52 who say, oh, I feel a little bit of a lack of recognition. The ones where it's really critical is a great deal. So 14% said they just do not feel a lot of recognition. And this indicates that managers have a lot more work to do in terms of employee recognition. But I hope that one of the takeaways from this webinar is that you'll see how easy it is just from those comments that everyone was putting in. Recognition is pretty low cost and easy, and there's just such a variety of ways to do it. You can kind of put your own personal spin on it as well.
Mm-hmm. And I won't take too much time on this slide because I think we've all shared some really great examples and showcasing how easy the application is to really just kind of jump in and commit to it and get started, the second you even get out of this meeting, going and recognizing someone. But I think, to the point that I talked about earlier is building recognition into your organization and making it a part of, it's just this habitual step that we take after a large project finishes or after a great interaction or meeting with a customer. It's just part of almost like your checklist of, I did the meeting, I asked for feedback, and then I shared my gratitude with everyone that supported me in doing this. So I think if you think of it as sort of one of those steps that you take, you'll, to your point, Elora, like you'll get that gratification too of like, I feel better that I made someone feel better today. So I tried to just split this up really quickly into sort of immediate, like do your own things, like implement it into team meetings, pick one team member a week and make sure you share your gratification. And then more organizational level is building those gratitude moments into, the end of larger projects, finding ways to recognize promotions when they happen across the organization and those types of things.
Yeah, and as a quick note, there's definitely things that can happen that can be negative if you're failing to have employees who feel heard, valued, and recognized. Not surprisingly, high turnover, stress, burnout, isolation among your employees, and low motivation. But we know the benefits. I think we've seen it. So increased employee retention, better social connection among employees, having that higher engagement and collaboration, as well as enhanced productivity. So I don't think we need to tell you about like all the benefits of doing it right and making sure your employees feel heard and valued. But now we'd like to show you some quick recommendations by stakeholders. So, as a manager or a team member, we can give you these practical takeaways.
Mm-hmm. We wanted to make sure that there was sort of something you could print and hang or share, and just a quick reference to all of the ways that you might be able to show, feeling heard, feeling valued, and recognition. I think the biggest thing here is that stakeholder piece. So what are all the different avenues that you can look at to make sure that you're checking into these three things? So the organization as a whole, is the org committed to making this a part of our culture and the way that we impact employees? Are managers trained, and do they understand all the ways that they can do this? And then you as an individual, like what are the things that you do day in and day out to make sure that other people feel heard, or that you yourself have a voice, showing value and showing recognition? So I think it's important to call out sort of the stakeholders that you can tap into to address all of these things, to make sure it's kind of going from big picture organization all the way down to every individual employee.
And then finally, just to wrap up, and this is how we'll kind of end it here, but feel free to drop in the chat. Based on our discussion today, could you share one small thing that you're going to start doing to encourage an environment where your employees feel heard, valued, or recognized? So one of those quick, easy things that we either talked about or that was in the chart on the last slide that you will do to make it a better workplace for your employees.
Surveys, daily personal recognition. Rachel, that's a great one.
Perfect. Yeah. Town hall meetings, open communication, quick check-in meetings. I love this. And these are all easy, quick things. There's of course more long-term stuff you can do, but these are the quick and easy ones, which are great wins to start with. Mm-hmm. One-on-ones. I appreciate you because I love it.
Mm-hmm. More frequent individual kudos. I love it. I think also starting meetings with that really positive affirmation and moment also puts people just in a really good mindset to then take in whatever you're going to discuss during that meeting. So I think there's also like a trickle down effect of how they feel in that moment and then how they feel during the rest of the meeting too.
Yeah, we welcome your ideas in the chat. Please keep dropping them in, but I want to thank you for attending our webinar and sharing all of your great ideas and insights. It's been such a pleasure to have this conversation and share our knowledge and experiences here.
Yeah, thank you so much. We really appreciate everyone's investment and feedback and comments. It makes it so much more fun to lead these sessions when everyone's engaged and talking and starting that dialogue. So thank you.
Thanks, Kristen.
All right, on that note, thank you everyone for joining, and we will see you on the next Tiny webinar. Have a wonderful rest of your day or evening, depending on where you are in the world.